Welcome to Unfixed. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence and the institution of higher education. I am Zach Justice, Professor of Communication Studies and Director of Faculty Development.
And I'm Nick Janos, Professor of Sociology.
We are employees of Chico State, and we will discuss some of our work, but this podcast is not affiliated with Chico State, and the views expressed here are not representative of the university.
Today, we're happy to welcome Brett Christie. Brett currently serves as the Vice President for Educational Innovations for Alchemy Learning. He has been a faculty developer at UC Berkeley and in the Cal State system. He has also had a system-wide role in supporting student success in the CSU and is a leading national figure in universal design for learning. In his role at Alchemy, Brett has led a series of outstanding webinars on AI in higher education. Brett, welcome to Unfixed.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Zach.
We asked Brett to join us because he offers a different perspective on AI in higher education that stretches beyond any campus or system. The Alchemy webinar series has featured experts from around the world, and attendance comes from an international audience. Brett, we've got so many questions to ask you, so many conversations. Let's jump right in.
Sounds great.
Yeah, so that's built on those webinars. Zach and I had the fortune of helping lead one. Zach has led some. We've attended some of them. We just imagine you've gained such a wealth of knowledge and experience leading those webinars for like many thousands of faculty administrators, like Zach said, from around the world. Kind of give our listeners a glimpse of what you're hearing, what you're learning, lessons taken from listening to those faculty members and administrators.
Great. Absolutely. It has been a great learning experience across the last, 2.5 years, focusing on what we call a series AI on campus. And as you pointed out, we've had a large number of people attend. We've been averaging 800 to 1,000 people per session, which is just mind-boggling. When you're on a campus and you're doing a webinar or in a system doing a webinar, you hope you get 50 people to show up, which is great. So we've been thrilled to have such a great turnout and so much interest and energy. And the way I approach these are really about the community of those that show up. And it's about the expertise they bring. It's about the interests they have, the needs that they have. And so, as you pointed out, it's been a great experience, not to just host these and prop up content and, hey, come listen to me or us, but really, how can we have this space where there's this dialogue that happens? And there's this intent that takes place through this conversation. And we make sure that our sessions, sure, we have a slide deck, but we also build in interactive activities. We have a very live chat, as you've experienced. It goes nonstop for the entire hour. And it's gotten to the point where people will, every 5 minutes during the session, even though we always let them know everything's going to be made available, they always ask us, we share the chat, we share the slides. So it's just really rewarding to have that level of interest. But really the biggest thing for me is that community space for gathering and dialogue and then creating shared understanding. What can we do to help lead a topic, and how can that shared understanding be created by us, but also by the participants? So that's been great.
Yeah, having attended and helped you with a couple, it really does feel like a community when you're in that space. And oftentimes with the chat and questions, there's always this, I've got to manage this and bring this back to the core content that we're hoping to address. But I think this is something that Nick and I really sort of learned from your style with this, is that oftentimes that flow does end up being part of the content and part of the takeaway for everybody in the group. So
appreciate that. We try and set it up so that there are going to be some tangibles as well that people can get from the session. And sure, you can offer a 1-hour recording. Some may, find that useful. You can offer the slide deck. That may be useful, but we also try and embed learning moments and activities where we can actually pull together the Padlet and the results and do an analysis and share that out as a recap. Or like I said, we can share an abridged version of the chat where people have shared things for that hour that we didn't plan on, but are really rich little learning nuggets that can then go back out across the community.
Yeah, before we leave this, so whenever I'm leading redesign workshops here locally at our campus, and there's always this sort of resistance and that sort of like unease, and sometimes it's existential. Like, how do you And that's what I noticed in those chats because I said like in this chat you have every human reaction you could to AI coming through with 1,000 people, right? How do you take that to help people at the end of the session or through the session kind of see that there is a new possibility and that whatever they're resisting or sort of fretting about, it can be something they can kind of come to grips with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the first things is acknowledging, where there are those tension points, where with something like AI, there might be anxiety. People might be overwhelmed. They might be against certain things about AI and in some cases certainly should. And so how do you first of all address those? And then how do you create those touch points and create those safe spots to have either dialogue or to break through where there's tension or frustration? How do you better inform someone where if they think, well, AI is only about this, they can realize, well, only in that instance, maybe, or only if used in a particular way or an uninformed way, yes, AI can be like that. But over here, if it's used in a particular way, and very informed in a very skilled way, then it can do very wonderful things as well. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Nick,
Yeah,
directly.
no, it does. I think that's, yeah.
Well,
Nice.
and Brett, I'm glad you brought that up. It's something that Nick and I have had to sort of come around on ourselves on the campus is that oftentimes when people are giving voice to concerns, right, you have to snap out of it's my job to respond to that or to
Mhm.
engage in a debate about this particular subpoint, right? Oftentimes you need to acknowledge the legitimacy of that because I think we all have concerns about these systems, what they're going to mean for society and education. And I think that strategy of acknowledging and voicing those concerns, it goes a long way towards helping people understand that we're in this together and we've got to figure it
Mhm.
out together.
No, great point. And it's not, yeah, as you said, it's not healthy to think that your role is, oh, I got to flip this person. No,
Hmm.
it's really how can you have a shared dialogue around that moment, whatever it might be, have that shared dialogue to where you each have a greater understanding of where you're coming from. And then that may inform you and change what you're doing or how you approach things or how you approach working with people going forward. It may also inform them and change how they see that situation. And they might be able to do something different going forward.
Awesome. Brett, we wanted to pick your brain about another thing that you sort of have a perspective on that a lot of us that are in universities don't, which is Alchemy's positioned in an interesting space, wide portfolio, and Nick and I, and I think listeners would be interested in knowing a little bit more about what gaps are you called in to fill, right? What are the places where universities are picking up the phone, especially regarding AI,
Mhm.
acknowledging the limitation of their current capacity and saying, we need help with this? What are those things, whether they be technical or organizational or whatever it is that they are?
Yeah. Often the gaps are really in capacity. And so we work often with, course design, program design, helping with online programs, all sorts of things that involve growth and scaling, and at the same time also retaining quality and things like that. And, as you well know, that most campuses will have a director of Center for Teaching and Learning, often on release time, often on a cycle of maybe 2 to 3 years, and then it moves on to the next person. So there can be issues of capacity and stability there. Those folks may or may not have learning designers in their unit. Maybe they sit in a parallel unit. Regardless, most campuses will have one learning designer per 100 to 300 courses, depending on the institution. So we're often brought in because of capacity. The people that the campuses have are certainly bright and talented, but they're just understaffed and undersourced. And so what we're able to do is come in and elevate and not replace the existing personnel and really enable them to do much more efficiently and effective work. And so, we've been working on that for a while with certain tools and resources that we have, and we've been doing that for a number of years. But, of course, with the advent of AI and coming out to the general public with Gen AI, is we've now got our Curie platform where we're brought in to help really scale course design and redesign efforts very effectively, where we can do things at about 75% less of the effort and cost. And we've got that in data. We've also got that in testimonials where, excuse me, we've got it at about 60%. Testimonials say about 70%. So that's where we're brought in, is really on that capacity, but also sometimes in helping to bring in more expertise about use of technology, more expertise about learning design principles. We have a large staff of learning designers from all over the country and even other parts of the world. And many of them are former instructors and current instructors, so they bring a lot of that expertise as well. So it's really about capacity and bringing in, infusing new types of pedagogy in some cases, or technology in other cases.
Well, I was going to ask, do you think that in the last 3 years that AI has increased the amount of calls or the work that you're doing, or is it just slot into the other concerns that people had with pedagogy and technology that have been going, people have been working on for the last 10, 15 years?
Yeah. A lot of the calls are still just because we've developed a pretty good reputation of, our learning design background and our experience and our approach, and that we are very careful to make sure that we meet people where they are, whether it's individual instructors or programs or institutions, that we're aligning ourselves with their efforts as best as possible, and that myself and others have a good understanding of what teaching and learning should be, ideally, regardless, across different modalities and things like that. So I think that's part of it, is to bring in more expertise on things like that, but also the fact that we're really leaning into AI, because that's something where we see a lot of potential when used properly. And so we've spent the last 3 years just really focusing on, okay, we know these are the essential learning theories and design principles, and we know these are the things that should happen for the best learner experiences. We know these are the different types of modalities. We know even that these are the different types of career readiness aspects. How can we make sure that that's all part of the process that we engage in with the institution?
And before we leave this, we were just curious if there's any sort of, and you don't need to mention a specific university or anything, but if there's anything that you encountered along the way that was especially surprising, like a weird bottleneck that showed up, or a campus that thought like, we need help doing, like this advanced work, and then you got in the door and you realized that the groundwork wasn't even laid. But we were wondering if there was any sort of like surprise anecdotes, because you do have experience with so many different campuses.
Yeah, I'm not thinking of a particular surprise anecdote. I just was thinking of the situation where often we come in and what's happening is there's this friction within the course building or course redesign process when you're trying to take somebody who's a faculty member who is so incredibly bright and deeply steeped in their content and their research, yet most times did not come forward with the training and teaching and all of that and in course design. It's sort of done by learn as you go type of process, and hopefully learn by feel and just getting smarter and smarter about creating good learning experiences. But often that's a slow process. And so there's this friction between the instructors and the learning designers working together, in that they have different skill sets and different approaches. And you might say that they're complementary or different sides of the same coin, but really there's just a lot of friction there and a lot of sticking points in that working relationship. Um, Building a course can take, 8 to 12 weeks in a formal course design process. And it's just really bogged down in this relationship that can have a lot of those sticking points. And so, that's where we've been trying to really kind of speed things along and bring in AI as this sort of automated facilitator of the expertise that both those folks hold, and how to get them together much more efficiently, much more effectively. So that's a long-winded non-anecdote.
No, but it does set up our next segment that I think Nick is going to lead
Yeah.
about EdTech.
Yeah, it was actually perfectly placed there, Brett, because you mentioned that you're incorporating AI into the help with course redesign,
Hmm.
And Zach and I kind of see this as a paradox. So these AI and automation tools seem to sort of replace a lot of tasks right across the university and increasingly across different sectors of the economy, but they create at the same time new demands in other areas like AI literacy and data ethics, governance, and integrations. So, and on the one hand, we could see a future where something like Alchemy or organizations like that have less to do because as people turn into the AI automated tools and as they get more and more sophisticated, they are kind of working with those and less. And this is the same dynamic we're seeing here with faculty and our students. Like as students do more work with the AI, it does raise the question like, well, wait, what am I doing? What's my role here in this process? Maybe can you, from your perspective there, working in that consulting role, how are you approaching that at Alchemy?
Yeah. And that's a great question. And then, ping me back to the question if I trail off a little bit. So one of the things that first came to mind when you're talking, Nick, is really about this proliferation of AI tools that, of course, came out right away. People are, wanting to chase the gold and find the magic ticket to have everybody purchase their tool. I focus on, with course design, I've looked at the AI course design builders that started popping up pretty early, and I've been tracking those. And I'll look at these AI course building tools, and what they'll do is they'll ask the instructor, what is the topic? How many quizzes do you want? Okay, great. Here's your course. It will literally generate it just from that. And that's where you're getting what people are calling slop
Hmm.
is it's fast, it's easy, but it's garbage. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we're mapping our process with the essential steps of the course build and course design process and make sure that the designer or the instructor are always in control along the way and they will be able to put in their context, whether it's giving the course description and course outcomes or even uploading the syllabus into our system and having that analyzed and then getting an understanding reflected back to them about their course, about their goals, about their learners, their characteristics, all of those things, and then being able to start building along the way in pretty big segments pretty quickly, but always getting the review of the instructor and the designer as needed. So, as long as it's done in a way that is architected very carefully and in mind, built in mind of the user and their eventual end user, the students, and how that's designed to enable things to be better, not just faster or cheaper. So, Nick, you probably need to follow up with me on that.
Yeah, no, it was making me think. We actually earlier in this year, in the summer, we interviewed a couple of K through 12 educators, and they had the exact same critique about all the products that are being deployed by EdTech companies into the K through 12 space,
Yeah.
and some of the ways that it really kind of lowers the bar. It makes things easier for teachers to design these things, but it's efficiency, quickness over sort of thoughtfulness or deep things. There's an attraction there, but it definitely resonates from what we heard from them as well.
Yeah, no, great
Well,
point. And it gets me thinking about, okay, if it's being sold as, faster and cheaper, and then you get the administrative level who's not as connected to what's happening in the classroom, is not as connected to how the tools do or don't work effectively. If they're hearing faster and cheaper, that's what works for them sometimes. And
Hmm.
the instructors are told, you're going to start using this more. Your time is being saved. We're going to be able to give you more tasks, all those different things. So you really have to think through the whole picture and think, okay, where can AI step in and do things more efficiently and more effectively for you or with you? And then what does that then allow you to do better as the instructor? Where can you then bring in that human presence? It makes me think of the research we've been doing for the last several years, and we do a lot of our own research as well as tracking what's out there. But related to the faculty experience is our research, and we asked instructors in our survey, what are the most critical things for the student learning experience? What are the most important things to happen? And they said the best things that you would want to hear or read is about community engagement, about welcome and belonging, even about accessibility, active learning, all those great things that you want to hear. But then in a different part of the survey, in a different way, we asked them, how do you spend your time? and it was on all these content tasks, and they would say grading, but they wouldn't say anything about feedback, which is, an important part. So there was this real disconnect sometimes between what they knew should be happening and what they're actually doing. And I think
Hmm.
some of that might have to do with comfort zone and what's expected of them. So, it's just part of the picture.
Brett, I'm so glad that you brought that up about the sort of do it faster and cheaper. That's so
Mm,
attractive to people who are dutifully trying to balance budgets and maybe sometimes trying to cut corners in worst case scenarios. But the one of the things that Nick and I have speculated about and to some degree observed is that we think that that disconnect between that sort of is AI a tool for efficiency that's going to allow us to increase course caps or increase course loads or whatever, and then the faculty resistance to that, we think that's rubbing off not just on administration, but on the technology itself in some instances, where that's starting to color some of the resistance that we're seeing, and like I said, understandable resistance from some faculty is because especially older faculty, they've been through these cycles before where here's this new amazing thing. Good
mm,
news, now you have 1,000 students instead of 100, right?
yeah.
And that's not an attractive pitch to somebody who's, already been teaching for 20, 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've seen that with online.
Right.
That the number of seats, you don't have to worry about the infrastructure, the physical building and space. You can just push out to as many students as possible. That's okay for certain types of learning experiences and outcomes, but not the type of things that we want in most of our courses. With AI, you can certainly scale certain things more efficiently. I'm thinking of certain chatbots that are built effectively. I'm thinking of something like Cogniti from, in Australia, University of Sydney, and what they've developed, and how you can have all of these virtual on-demand 24/7 TA types of supports. And so that can certainly be an efficiency, and that can enable the instructor not to have to respond to continual remedial questions, let's say. Not that you don't want the instructor engaging with students and answering certain questions, but just these things that are at very base level and that are so available to them through something like a chatbot, let's say.
Yeah, actually, you raise an interesting sidebar there on the different tools and technologies. So we're being
Mm,
pretty vague, but the CSU signed the deal with OpenAI
mhm,
for
mhm.
ChatGPT access. That's sort of probably the biggest and widespread technology that most of us are using at the CSUs. I know personally, and my colleagues, kind of the default. There's others, the Gemini and all the others, but
Sure.
then there's actually ed tech companies that make those products. You mentioned one, I don't remember the name, but that a university or system would buy, and these are sort of more intentional AI plus pedagogy plus learning products. That is not just an open chatbot like Gemini or ChatGPT. Can you just kind of distinguish, like, are those the latter, the ones that you mentioned, actually in use, or are most universities just kind of like, yeah, whatever tools the professor's grabbing to use, like ChatGPT or Gemini?
Yeah, in most cases, from my knowledge at least, it's LLMs in general. People are using, and they're doing it hopefully in more than a Google search type experience. They're doing it very intentionally. They're knowing their prompting and all those things. And they can do many things effectively, but it's really about, okay, how can you set up something like Cogniti, which I mentioned, and that's out of University of Sydney. And if you hear of Danny Liu's name and folks like that, they've done a very thoughtful job of developing something that instructors can actually take Cogniti and train it on their course materials and
Hmm.
objectives.
Hmm.
And then that course bot is available to students to then answer questions in the context of the course. It's been trained on the context and the outcomes and what students are expected to know and be able to do. And so then you get a much more intentional experience where if you just tell students, oh, well, use an LLM to try and figure it out, that type of
Hmm.
thing, then you're going to get very mixed results. You're going to get unethical results. You're going to get students entering private information, unfortunately, in some things. So using smarter chat bots, and there are all sorts of bots out there. They're very easy to develop, and so you have a lot of them, and you're going to have varying quality. But if you look at something like Cogniti as example, I'd bring that up one more time, is you've got something that was developed by a very informed and intentional team that knew the technology, but also knows about learning design, learning theories, principles, all of that.
I think that oftentimes startups and also universities are caught in a tough space with this, right? Because I know there's a desire to do that, and I know several universities have spun up their own sort of internal versions of ChatGPT built on that
Mhm.
infrastructure. But then every time the underlying infrastructure changes, it disrupts whatever wrapper or infrastructure you built on top. And we've also seen this, I think, more in the private sector than in public universities, where, every time ChatGPT updates their model, there's some headline on TechCrunch that says, that was the sound of 1,000 startups dying. Because now the thing that was the feature that you were banking your entire company
Mhm.
on is now just part of the basic package of ChatGPT that you get off the shelf. And I can't imagine a different scenario where it has been more difficult to build on that infrastructure when we've never seen something change so fast.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what's been I think just overwhelming for so many people is the fact that, in the last going on 3 years next month is we've just seen things change so rapidly. First of all, most people did not see this coming whatsoever. And then it just showed up overnight, as you know, and then it's been racing ever since. And so just to keep up with it is overwhelming. People use the term drinking from a fire hose. So, and I know you follow Ethan Mollick pretty closely, and even he has said, "This is my job. I can't keep up with it."
Hmm.
So it's a matter of just being as informed as possible, and let's think of, let's say, the instructor role. It's like, okay, if you can work pretty efficiently and pretty effectively and understand things in the LLM space, you can adapt to different tools to a certain extent pretty quickly using the same mindset, understanding the same, conceptual understanding of what an LLM is and what's behind things. So, I mean, I think that's good. And then being able to be informed and then being critical of some of the new developments. So we've now got Sora in ChatGPT,
Hmm.
and so that's bringing up these videos and more people being able to create deep fakes. The announcement that there's going to be the you can create adult oriented content in
Yeah.
ChatGPT. So now all of your students 18 and over have access to that through your agreement, with or with OpenAI and
Hmm.
ChatGPT. So
Nick and I just had a conversation about this yesterday, and we're going to do some work on this later, maybe on the blog, maybe in the podcast. But these new developments, one of the consequences is they are making it a little bit harder to have serious conversations about the technology, right? Because
yeah,
you bring up to a faculty member who was already skeptical, oh, we need to think about this in the classroom, and their response is like, oh, the slop tool?
yeah,
You want me to use the thing that like makes Martin Luther King Jr. announce WWE events? And it's like,
yeah,
maybe I don't know. Like it's it is just it has changed the difficulty level of
yeah,
introducing this to new audiences for sure.
Yeah. I mean,
absolutely. Oh,
certainly could make some of those other products and other chatbot companies more attractive to universities.
Yeah,
mhm.
yeah,
For
yeah,
sure. Yeah, and so when an instructor who, may not have the best perception of AI and then they see that, they certainly have a case. I mean, it makes a mockery of, just trying to have this integrity of the experience
yeah,
Hmm.
when you've
Hmm.
got something that can just crank out all sorts of slop when really what you want to do is use it as a honed tool for teaching and
Hmm.
learning and personalization and all those great things that it can do. So, and that's where, institutions and instructors kind of have to continually, sort of refine the guardrails that you put
Hmm.
up. But, we're still at the level where AI literacy, and there are different definitions, of course, for that. But if you just think of general baseline AI literacy, we're still at a pretty low level as far as how many people have AI literacy that we would hope to be able to have these totally constructive conversations across the board that don't always have to be in agreement, but at least they're at an informed level.
Yeah.
And so we're far away from that. I'm working on a concept that, I'm calling it herd AI literacy. Is when do we get to that 70% or whatever it is, when we talked about the pandemic as far as
Hmm.
inoculation, when do we get to that 70% plus of herd literacy related to AI? So we really move forward as informed and as constructive as possible.
Yeah, I like that. And, and I know this I'm sure happens to you, but we're still meeting and working with faculty who are just using it for the first time 3 years
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
and that's still a thing. So, there's
Mhm.
a lot of work and conversations to be had and ways that we can help faculty, just get on board now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So as we're
Mhm.
closing up here, Brett, we Nick and I were hoping that you could take a minute and sort of peer forward into the future, and we agree with you. There's the foundational work is going to be ongoing for years here for all of us at the institutional level, for you working across institutions, working on literacy, just basic usage, all those sort of things. But beyond that, looking ahead, what are some things that you're anticipating over the next 3 to 5 years? Opportunities, risks, changing relationships between outside consultancies and higher education institutions. As you peer around the corner, what do you see?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind for me is something that I've been envisioning and hoping to happen for, let's see, I'd say about 25 years almost now. It's not something that I created, but just this opportunity for true personalization of the learning experience. And of course, Salman Khan's been talking about that for a while, and I go all the way back to Vygotsky and zone of proximal development is how do you create learning experiences that meet the individual learner in their zone of proximal development where things are not too difficult and not too easy, where it's going to continually nudge them along in where they are and give them that next step that they need and just allow them to grow most efficiently and most effectively. So I think there's a lot of promise with AI. It's got to certainly be developed in certain ways for the learning experience. How do we come to agreement with that? Who's going to develop it? Who owns it? Who adapts it in what ways? How can institutions or schools set the parameters for their learners? How can individual learners set the parameters? All those things have to be developed, but there is still so much possibility now, I think, with AI being able to get to that spot where we can have true personalization taking place. So that's one thing as I see as far as, a hope that I keep looking for and that I hold. I mean, the continued risks will be to me, ethical concerns, biases, the things we're talking about is how do we weed those out more and more or control for those more and more? Also, how do we create and then maintain equity of access, equity of the experience? Those who are getting the cheap mobile versions of something versus those who can have the $200 a month. I'm going to make six figures while I'm a student version, that type of thing. So, I think keeping that in mind. And then as far as working relationships going forward and what I see between the private sector and public or education sector is how can we really partner to create opportunities that are, workplace oriented so that the institution is doing what they can and what they do best, the educational institution, what they do best to inform and prepare the student, but hopefully in the best way for the workplace reality that's so rapidly changing. And on the flip of that, how can the workforce partner with the institutions to make sure that that's happening in the way that they would want it to most effectively? So I think we'll see more and more of those partnerships happening. There's the demand for it. There's the pressure on higher education to maintain relevance, especially in budget times and political times. And so, how can we just pull all of those things together in an ideal situation on behalf of the students that are coming through and hopefully to their prosperity going forward?
Awesome. Thank you, Brett, so much for being so generous with your time and your insights. Nick and I have recommended to so many people to check out what Alchemy is doing, and
Mm,
specifically the webinar series. I continue to think that is some of the best content that I've seen from any organization. And the fact that it's on YouTube for free is just such an asset for teachers and learners all over the world. So we will be linking to that in the show notes along with the Alchemy website generally. Anything else that you would like to point listeners to as we close up?
yeah, we do have our playlist. And of course, with those YouTube recordings, you can also look for our recaps, which contain the materials that we've created for those sessions, but also the community generated thoughts and materials that come from those sessions as well. So I think that's where there's additional richness that you don't see in many of the platforms that are out there. And then
Fantastic.
the other thing I would share is you have both been generous with your time and being parts of those webinars. And so I want to thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing at your institution, in the CSU system, and others that you work with to just bring more dialogue around all of this, help people become more informed about all of the issues, about all of the opportunities, and just learning from each other.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you,
Thank
Brett.
you.
It's sort of kitschy, but I keep saying to everybody that I work with from different institutions, right? We need collaborators, not competitors, because there's so much work to do in this space. And I think Nick and I have both been fortunate to count you among our collaborations. And thank you for being a part of that again here today.
I appreciate that. I mean, to me, education is community, and community is open. It's not about locking things down. It's not about this is my intellectual property. It's what is our space that we can work in most effectively together, and how do we share? Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can find our writing on meltsintoair.org and connect with us on Blue Sky at meltsintoair.bsky.social and on LinkedIn, Zach Justice and Nick Janos. Find these links and more in the show notes. If you have feedback or want to share an idea, email us at unfixed@meltsintoair.org. Thank you to Jamie Gunderson for producing and editing the show.